It's a season of new beginnings. Many of us are meeting new people or getting reacquainted with people, certainly for students on the university campus, college campuses. Let's face it, from kindergarten all the way through, there's a little bit of anxiety mixed with the excitement because of a new roommate or new classmates. I just loved this little prompter for the students at the university where my son is attending. Can you see this? I promise to listen to you, to care about you, to help you find support, to be a friend. And those buttons, you have to wear both buttons. There's the, how are you? No, really, how are you? And I think we need to embrace this as the fall season unfolds. I hate to use the word fall, but it is coming. And this is really what my guest is all about. The man with the amazing doctorate. He has a doctorate in semiotics and future studies. For 2 weeks every month, Jim Caruso serves as a crisis intervention conflict coach for the BC Yukon District of the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, a ministry of caring for pastors and their families that has grown Jim over 29 years?
26 years.
26 years.
Yeah.
You've been all about reaching out to others, an eye out to others and their needs.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful experience.
Okay, a doctor of semiotics.
Well,
and future studies, they go together.
Yeah, they do. Semiotics is kind of like you being a mom, you understand that you know things that your kids know that they don't know that you know. It's being and it's being aware of your surroundings, but especially being aware of the surroundings. What is God doing? Being aware of what God's doing in the world today, and so that's what semiotics is about.
Wow.
Just
you take that into places where the surroundings have been anything but desirable.
Yes.
Crises.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a big part of our life. I grew up in a dysfunctional family. I didn't realize I was dysfunctional until I started my master's degree and took a course on counseling dysfunctional families and figured out that this person knew more about me than I did, really. And so when I look back on my life, it was always there was always some crises or some chaos, and so I kind of wanted to be someone who could maybe be helpful in that area for other people as well.
We've discovered we have a few things in common.
Right.
Lost our dads early. Your dad was diagnosed with cancer when you were 8?
I was 8, yeah. He had colon cancer. That was back in the early 60s. So there wasn't the type of care that we have today, obviously. And so there was a lot of surgeries, a lot of pain, a lot of turmoil, and we weren't from a Christian home. So we didn't have the support and hope that we know now.
Your dad passed away when you were 13.
13 years old.
Just starting the teen years.
Yeah, and it was difficult because it was right at Christmas time that he was getting worse, and then he passed away in the first part of January that following year. And I didn't understand, but we had a small Baptist church in our town at the time, and we didn't attend, but my dad was visited by the Baptist pastor, and I'm pretty sure it was right around Christmas Day that he led him to Christ. Oh. And
there's the hope.
And at that time, I didn't know what that meant, but it was so powerful when I did find out what this was all about, and when I came to Christ. And one of the things was that in the last couple of weeks of his life, one of the nurses had told my mom after that he would be reading his Bible and praying. And I just really think about in Acts where it talks about the Philippian jailer who Paul and Silas were in the earthquake, and he was fearful for his life, and Paul cried out to him that we're all here, we're all safe, and that salvation, he says, how can I be saved? And he says, this salvation is for you and for your family. And I don't know this for sure, but I'm sure that my dad was praying for us as a family. And since then, my mom has come to Christ, my brother has come, and so we've seen a significant change in our lives as a result of that.
And truly, it has been a journey, because you spent a decade blaming God for killing your dad. You were angry.
I was pretty angry with him. I actually shook my fist in his face for a long time, saying that, you know, I understood this loving concept of a father in heaven, and yet took my dad when I really needed him. So it was a real struggle with that. I realize now that it wasn't God who took my dad. It was the cancer, and it was something that just is part of life. And so, but to understand that he accepted that gift of salvation, and that he's been there for, my goodness, almost 50 some years, you know. I guess I'm not quite that old, but he's 45 years or so anyway, that he has been, you know, waiting for us and living in the fullness of his life.
Wonderful. The big story.
The big story, yeah.
The big story. And we won't have time to go into all the details of your journey, but I chuckled when I read that you and your wife could start fires with your vocabulary.
Yeah, it was, I was a welder at the time we became Christians, and that was just kind of the culture. We both swore pretty bad. She's watching this, and I'm sure she'll be pretty excited me sharing this.
Don't tell that, Elaine's saying, watching that.
We could actually start fires with our language. We tried really hard, even before we were Christians, to quit swearing, because it wasn't a good thing, and couldn't do it. Just could not survive. And one of the things that we didn't even ask for, but when Christ came into our lives, it was like things changed, and that was a significant change.
You had one little girl at the time, just 8 months old.
8 months old.
In the green room, you were saying your children didn't know the drunkenness, the language.
No.
What you perhaps had experienced growing up, and certainly the path you were on, God turned it around.
He did. It was a significant change in our lives, and so our children were raised in a different environment than we were. And I have to say, my mom and dad did a phenomenal job of raising us with what they were able to do, with what they knew. And of course, times were very different then.
Let me quote your friend Wilf, who's in heaven now.
Yes.
A wild man in his day.
He was.
But he said to you, Jim, you're good enough to be a Christian.
Yeah, I took me 10 years to figure out what he really had said, but I realized that I didn't feel that I was acceptable. I think he had to, you know, get fairly well cleaned up, and I had this anger towards God. And Wilf was a fellow that I drank with and fought with and partied with and worked with, and he had lost his eyesight due to diabetes, and I'd been away from him for about a year, and I came home and knocked on his door and to just say hello again, and he just looked at me, and I said, well, that's a great way to greet somebody you haven't seen for a while. And he says, well, I have to tell you, I'm totally blind. This is what God gave me for Christmas. Just a real bitterness, and so that just kind of reinforced my feeling about God and his.
One more thing to be angry at God
absolutely. About. And so so anyways, his wife in this process, because they had 2 little children, she recommitted her life to Christ and started going back to church. And then Wilf, with the same kind of line of thinking that I do, said, well, you're just going to church and drinking wine and running around with the guys in the church, and so I'm going to come to church and expose this. But because he's blind, he said, I'll bring my brother who can see what's going on, and so they both went, and they both got saved. And so then, I didn't know what saved was, and so they started after us, and in a good way. They started praying for us, and our lives changed.
So you and I both came to know Jesus personally at the age of 24.
Around 24, yeah.
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 Both lost our dads early.
Yeah.
Lost for a while, and then found.
Yeah.
It's great.
Totally
just
different.
Great. Now, out of one fire and into another. I am so amazed. Tell us what your wife does. Tell us what her master's degree is in.
She has a Master's of Arts in Christian Studies from the Axe Seminary in Langley.
Yeah, we can get that one.
And
But the other one.
But she did her thesis on disaster management, and especially does workshops for developing care through the local church in these areas. So if there's an earthquake,
floods, fires, tsunamis.
I have watched every disaster movie that has ever been made.
And the thing is, you don't have to watch the movie anymore. Just turn on the news.
No, that's right. Yes,
it's happening somewhere in the world.
Exactly, and so
even in your province.
And the church is the best picture of a resource because we have all the gifts and we have all the resources. So it's the best thing to mobilize in a disaster. And we have fires and we have floods and we have earthquakes, and we of course live on the West Coast, which is, the possibility of a huge earthquake is very prevalent. And so
and the fires and flooding, I mean, there's something going on all the time. What does Elaine do? Go to the local church?
Well, she is, right now she's just developing she's taught a workshop in our church, and she would like to do more of that, preparing the church.
It's emergency response.
Exactly. And we have emergency social services that she was quite involved with as well. And so it's a very practical aspect of bringing the gospel and care into your community. So I think it's great.
And you went from firefighting to volunteer ambulance, right?
That's right.
To full-time
ambulance,
and now caring for those who provide.
Exactly, yeah. And we threw in a little bit of RCMP chaplaincy in there as well.
That's right, as well. It's just a wonderful story. I want to take a look at the cover of this is hot off the press.
This is fresh.
Last week?
Friday I got it.
First book. Don't look in the bookstore yet. Middle of September. Spiritual Sinkholes, Avoiding the Debilitating Effects of Compassion Fatigue in Church Leadership. That near your house, that sinkhole?
No. No, it's a stock picture, but it depicts exactly what the book is about, how we come up to a certain place in our lives in ministry, and then there's a big washout because underneath the pavement, there's nothing to support it. Something's eroded that, and the pressure gets on the outside so much that you sink down into the hole. And the beauty is that with the hope in Christ, we can get out of that hole, and you can see the road kind of goes back up the hill, and we back on with our ministry. Get
back on track, nourished.
So it's a tool, hopefully, for health and longevity for pastors and their families, church leaders, anyone who is a caregiver, counselors, doctors, paramedics, firefighters, police, anyone who cares for those who need care.